Good morning. Is it still? Yes, it is still. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to come on today because I wanted to share with you about trauma. So many of you will know that I have gone through the experience, if you like, or am going through the experience of codependency. So I was codependent with a family member for a very many years, basically. And around 2014, I started reading a book. I can't even remember how I got hold of that book, by Melody Beattie, I think it was. And it was all about codependency, and I started to realize that actually I was codependent. And since that year I've been working on that codependency, and I've ended up actually letting that family member go because of the toxicity and the narcissism. And I'm not really here to talk about that today, but I wanted to just talk about something that came up, or has been come out for the last couple of years, and especially in the last month or so, as to how trauma can play out in your daily life. So, not talking really regarding romantic relationships. So, for instance, for me, this is to do with dentistry. So I needed to have a filling replaced a couple of years ago, and I went to a new dentist, basically because I was no longer with my old one through their own fault. Um, and basically, what happened was he was a narcissistic person. He was, as far as I was concerned, a bully. He basically refused to do the treatment that needed to be done. He did something that was temporary, and he wanted to do, let's just say, he wanted to do a root canal treatment when there was no need for one. He basically got to the point where he was blaming everything on me, that my jaw was misaligned, that it was everything was to do with me, nothing to do with what he had done at all. He referred me to consultants. The consultants actually affirmed and validated, and this is why I'm talking about this, that no, my jaw was not misaligned, which I already knew. I knew that my jaw was perfectly okay until he did what did the temporary filling that he did, and did it too low, and thus causing a problem. So I knew my jaw wasn't misaligned, but it took him being referred to a consultant who said, yes, you're right. They also believed that I had a root infection, and I said, I don't. I've had an infection before, I've had an abscess, I know what that feels like. They basically wanted to do a root canal because they felt there was an infection. I said, there isn't an infection, like, we know that, it's already been documented. And that was confirmed not just by another consultant, but also by another private dentist as well, that I ended up having to go to see if I could try and sort this out. But this bullying narcissistic dentist practice, not only did they turn around and say that I couldn't see another dentist there because that dentist was just back up what the other one had done, they refused point blank to do that mid treatment as well. And okay, I get that, but actually, if somebody's having problems, then it's about addressing them. And they ended up sacking me. So they sacked me, again, blaming everything on me, when actually it wasn't. They were valid symptoms, they were valid issues. I actually said that I felt that the tooth was too close to the nerve, and that was the actual issue, and all that it would need doing is that filling taken out, putting some packing in, and having it redone. And the reason I said that is because I'm very much like my mum. She'd had that, she understood my experience, said that's what it sounds like to me because of what she went through. He ignored that completely. He said, no, it's not, everything I've done is fine, there's nothing wrong with that filling, and so on. Now, I had that verified again by an NHS consultant that absolutely the root cause of it, excuse the pun, was that he had actually, that basically it was too close to the nerve and it needed to be packed. So I had everything validated, but it doesn't feel quite the same when it comes to you in a letter, if that makes sense. When I had somebody say, yes, your jaw's not misaligned and you don't have an infection, they did say that live, and suddenly you feel validated. And the reason that I'm sharing this is because when you've had a lot of trauma, quite often you have been invalidated. So your experience has been dismissed, your feelings, what you're feeling, has been dismissed, what you're actually going through, has been dismissed. And basically that's effectively what was going on, is because I'd had that invalidation. you then start to, the invalidation also it relates to things like your needs. So you effectively you're having your needs invalidated when you have a lot of trauma, or when you've experienced trauma with people. If people have gaslit you and dismissed your experience, dismissed your feelings, ignored what you're going through, ignoring that yes, you're coming with valid concerns and so on. It's invalidation, and there is such a relief, an emotional relief as well as a physical relief, when somebody does validate what you are going through, that you are not crazy, that actually this is, you are going through this, you are feeling what you're feeling, you are seeing what you're seeing, hearing what you're hearing, whatever it is. Okay, in my case, I was feeling these issues with my jaw, that the filling felt too high and too low on one side and on the other, that I was having issues with sensitivity and pressure and things like that. And as I say, I didn't have it validated by the narcissistic dentist. Basically, they bullied me and eventually sacked me. And so completely invalidated, completely dismissed. It triggers a lot within you if you've had trauma where it's not safe to express yourself, because quite often what's happened is your past is, I've expressed myself, and for that I've been rejected, or I've been abandoned, or I've been ridiculed, I've been humiliated, I've been judged, and so on. All of those kind of things happen. And that's kind of how I felt with a narcissistic dentist, even though there was another part of me that was like, no, this is absolutely valid. I know my body well enough. I've been doing lots of healing and lots of, mind body awareness since 2014. So I know my body well enough to actually know what it's feeling and so on. But it was that part of me that had been through those traumas that was so upset that yet again she'd been, effectively rejected, abandoned, because I couldn't get hold of any other NHS dentist. So I was literally left with that for a year. Then went to see another dentist this year, and let's just say that didn't quite go as planned either. Not to her detriment, I don't mean that to her. She was lovely and trying to accommodate, and obviously it's a tricky job for her, because now we've had a year of the bite being different because the filling was too low. So there's been a lot around that. So basically I've had problems with that. I found that they kind of couldn't really get to the bottom of it, and they were sort of just looking at me like, we don't really know what to do. We don't know what to do with this, and anybody that suffers with fibromyalgia will have gone through that quite a lot at a doctor's. We don't really know what to do with this. We're just going to give you some gabapentin and some amitriptyline and tramadol and whatever, and off you go. So you kind of, again, you get used to your needs not being met, your needs not being validated, and so on. And as I say, I'm quite stubborn, and that actually works in good stead with regards to having suffering with fibromyalgia, or doing fibromyalgia, as I like to call it. But I basically paid to go and see a private dentist this morning to see if we could kind of get to the bottom of things. Was there something they could do? What do they feel would be the best approach to move forward with? And basically, I won't go into the whole thing, but at one point he actually said, you are not crazy. You are not crazy. Your concerns are valid. You're going through these symptoms. You are getting the headaches and the jaw issues and so on, and the bite issues, etc. And to hear somebody say, you are not crazy, you are experiencing this, and you've got every right to go back to your dentist and tell them this, was so validating, was so important. And it just shows you, as I say, I've been doing healing and therapy on myself and seeing different people for therapy since 2014. And I do still get triggered. So with the lady dentist that I went to before I paid for this session today, I tried to explain to her about trauma, and just said to her, when you've been through a lot of trauma, you often feel like you are a burden and a nuisance. And the reason is because actually what's happened, especially with adverse childhood experiences and with childhood trauma, is effectively somebody has made you feel like having needs means you're a burden or a nuisance. And normally it's a narcissistic person, as I say, that is the contributor to that, or the toxic household, or whatever it is. But for me, it was a narcissistic parent. And the thing is that I had to explain that to them and say, it's triggering me every time I come in here. because I'm feeling like a burden and a nuisance, even though logically there's a part of me that knows I'm not. That I had the filling done, it wasn't filed down, if you like, there and then, because they said your face is too numb, so let's leave it, see how it goes, come back to us if it needs doing. So even though that was valid, and it was like the permission was given to come back, when I came back, I said to them, it triggers me into being a burden and a nuisance. And that I wanted to talk about that because of the reasons why that comes up, of what we've gone through in the past, of basically, as I say, us being made to feel, like our needs are a nuisance, and that we shouldn't have needs. And it can come up in lots of different situations. With me, dentistry sadly is one. And I did come away today and I was tapping because actually it made me very emotional when I got in the car that dentist had actually validated my experience, had been kind enough to actually turn around and say, I would go back to your NHS dentist and I would suggest this approach. And that's all it takes when you've been through trauma, is to find someone that, he doesn't necessarily understand trauma. He might not be trauma informed, but he was kind enough and present enough and emotionally available enough, maybe as a person in general, to understand that yes, you're coming in and you have those concerns, and he spent time to walk through that and go through that. So I wanted to share that with you because you might have the same thing where you have been invalidated in the past. You've had your feelings dismissed. You've had your experience, what you are experiencing completely dismissed, or had people just kind of go, I don't understand. I mean, the dentist today said you're basically like within the 10% that has these certain issues, and you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. That's quite common for me, that I'm in that rare category and lots of different things. And again, it's something that you just end up kind of having to get used to and go, right, okay, but he didn't mean it as a slight, and as I say, it was a very validating appointment, and it's allowed me to come away, apart from the emotional relief and the physical relief, with a plan to move forwards, and also with the confidence to ring my own NHS dentist to say, right, given everything that's gone on, this is what has now been suggested. Can we move forwards with that? And it's not too big a request, so I'm hoping obviously that it will actually go well. But it just shows you how, as I say, invalidation can get triggered, if you're not in front of the right person who perhaps has that compassion or has that presence or whatever you might call it, to be able to say, yes, what you are going through is completely valid. Your concerns are valid. Let's look at that. Let's work with that. Let's go through it bit by bit. So if you've ever felt like a burden, if you've ever felt like a nuisance, it may well be, as I say, because, adverse childhood experiences, we've gone through have made us feel, if you like. And I know people can say, oh, nobody can make you feel something, and that is true. But also, as a child, up to the age of 7, you are soaking in every bit of information. So if you've gone through that and somebody has made you feel like you are a burden or a nuisance for having needs or wanting your needs met because you're a child and you can't do it for yourself, for instance, or you don't have the capacity for that emotional regulation or that feeling of safety, or you can't self-comfort yourself, and so on, you're going to feel that way. You're going to feel like a burden or a nuisance. Now, a lot of people will say to me, well, what do you then do about that? Well, the one thing I like probably the most, and I use the most because it's quite convenient, is tapping. So emotional freedom technique, tapping, TFT, thought field therapy. They're slightly different and similar in a lot of ways, but basically tapping on the meridian points. So it's like acupuncture without needles. So on the way home, obviously I couldn't do that because I'm driving, but I've come back and I've done some tapping around what I've been feeling from that appointment today in a good way. And from other triggers. So if you have things like that, like medical things where you're getting triggered emotionally, learn to do tapping. It's so easy to do. and it can be really effective. And I say it so much to people, is when we are being emotionally triggered, the universe often sends us things to bring up stuff that we've already been through, and then we can just, if we're, I suppose, present enough and we're clued up enough to kind of go, okay, this is what's going on, then we can use that. We can use that as a gift, even though it doesn't seem like a gift maybe at the time because it's deeply emotional and so on, and it's triggering your trauma. Actually use it to tap it out, because what will often happen is, thoughts create feelings that create behavior. Okay. And the thing is you might be very aware of the emotions, the feelings, but you won't necessarily be aware of the belief. I am most of the time, or I can get to it because of being a therapist and I can work myself through it. Okay, so you might not necessarily be aware that you feel like a burden or a nuisance. You might just have feelings that come up that might make you feel ashamed, for instance. And that definitely occurred to me, that I definitely had that with my current NHS dentist, is I felt it was me. Therefore, it was like, I'm going to go somewhere else because I can't bear to go back to you because of the shame, And so it was partly done for that reason, and it was partly done because I wanted to see somebody else who had been recommended previously anyway, to actually see if they could give a different take on it, and help. And obviously they have. They have been able to say what's going on, why, and what would be the plan to move forwards. So now I don't feel ashamed of bringing my dentist up and saying, right, this is the situation. Because actually, by me actually doing that, I'm looking after my own needs. Because when this first happened and the filling became too low again, I went through a ton of anxiety. And I normally know when I'm waking up with anxiety, I'm really hot at like 6 in the morning, it's because I'm not dealing with something that I need to deal with. And there is a part of me that is then kind of going, hey, I'm here, you need to do something about that. So I knew that was there, and it was just a case of getting things obviously organised and the ball rolling so that we could do that. Because often what happens is we feel out of control, and if you feel out of control, you feel unsafe. Those two go together. So it's a case of like, how do I get back into control? Well, I get back into control by taking my power back, by doing whatever I need to do to resolve this situation. And that's what we've done today. We've had the appointment, and here we are. And that's the thing, is you don't always need to be aware of the belief. It's a good idea to be aware if you have that you're feeling a burden and a nuisance, because again, that will be, something in your present is triggering it, but it goes a lot further back. But what I'm saying is use that opportunity to tap stuff out. Because what I have found, I've learned the hard way, is that the universe will keep sending you situations that make you feel like a burden or a nuisance, to bring up those feelings so that you can actually start working with them and releasing them. And when you do the tapping, often, yes, people will say, I emotionally I feel a lot better. But also what it does is it actually changes people's perspective. So you actually end up shifting and transforming the beliefs that created those emotions or feelings in the first place as well. So your perspective changes. So instead of you then feeling like a burden or a nuisance, often what will happen is if you tap that out, you'll be like, yeah, actually, I've got every right to go back to my dentist and say this, and ask to obviously, have a plan moving forwards and so on. So you begin to validate your own needs more. You start to learn to do that. So it was a longer video than I anticipated, but as I say, burden, nuisance, invalidation, they kind of all go hand in hand with adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma, whatever you want to name it, and as I say, if you're getting emotionally triggered, learn how to tap. There's loads of tapping videos on YouTube. Okay, just write tapping for anxiety, tapping for grief, tapping for trauma, and start to learn the tapping moves. Yes, it gets more in depth than what might be shown on some of the videos, but use that. Learn to start tapping, because if you release those triggers, the universe doesn't have to send you something else. And as I say, I've learned the hard way. So now, whenever I can, I will tap stuff out as I'm in it. Had it with a friend the other day. Something really triggered them into quite a bit of anger and frustration and powerlessness. And I said to him, right, if you then go to that organisation in that energy, it's not going to go well, because what you give out is what you get back, if you think of the figure eight. Okay, so we actually sat and tapped straight away there and then on the emotions they were feeling, what it was rated out of 10, and got it down to basically, yeah, I don't have it now. And straight away, you could see it. You could see it in the person's physicality. You know, their whole body was relaxed. Their face didn't have kind of that red glow that you do when you're angry and frustrated and stressed. And of course, they'd gone into the organisation, requested what they needed to request. That's coming, and that's the thing. You know, that's why I say to people, right, you're in it. Let's tap it. Let's tap it out. It's important to me to do that, you know. And as a therapist, that's one of the things I'm really focused on. Is there's no point saying to my clients to do this if I don't do this stuff myself when I get triggered. And yes, there are times when you can't do it when you're in the trigger. You know, driving home, I can't sit and tapping. Not a great idea. You know, it might be that actually in the dentist chair, you know, he's got his hand in your mouth, and, you know, yeah, I can't sit there and tap. I can sit and I can actually do that. And sometimes even just that point, the karate chop point, will actually start to help release things. So sometimes I can do it to a certain point if I'm feeling quite triggered in the chair. And there's also a point here called the gamut spot, and I can do that one as well, to actually calm any anxiety and stuff I'm feeling. But yes, there are going to be situations where you can't tap out that trigger at that moment in time, and then we have to obviously do it another way and kind of get back into it later on, and be able to work with it. But a lot of the time you can. A lot of the time, you know, you're at home and you're like, ugh, something's really frustrating me, stressing me, I feel out of control, I feel powerless, I feel like a burden, a nuisance, whatever it is. You know, learn how to tap it out. So, videos at 21 minutes. I'm going to leave it at that. As I say, it was a bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but I wanted to share that with people that have gone through trauma, you know, do experience trauma. A lot of people with fibro, most people with fibromyalgia have gone through a lot of trauma. So, you know, you guys may well turn around and say, yes, I can relate to feeling like a burden and a nuisance. So, as I say, it plays out in lots of different areas of our life, not just relationships or friendships or workplaces or whatever, you know. As I say, the dentist has been one for me for a while, and I've been working on it each time, you know, where I can. And as I say, the feeling of when you are validated, that to me says, yeah, that's somebody I can go to, that's somebody I can trust. And that's important, again, is knowing that. I've had to go through various opticians, I've had to go through various dentists before I get to somebody and I go, yeah, you get it. It might not be trauma informed, but you get it. You understand how to work with people that have been through trauma, and that is important. So I think sometimes also it's finding that specific person, or team. Sometimes it's team, it's not just the dentist, but that particular practice or whatever that do get it. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening or watching. If you're watching the replay, or you can always type #replay. Feel free to add your own comments. You might have been adding comments. I just can't see it with the apparatus I'm actually using, but I can always go back and reply to them later on. So thanks for watching, and take care.